Hello, I'm Reverend Brian Ferguson. I have the honour of serving as the minister here, and it's now the time for all ages. So I invite all those young in body or spirit forward for the time for all ages, and if you can join me, that would be great. And I know some of you are coming from away up in the wilds of the loft. How are you all doing? It's lovely to see you all. Grab a seat. You can sit in the blanket. I will sit in my overlarge chair. This is actually a regular sized chair. I just make it look small. Hello. Well, thank you all for coming. And you know, this story, it actually comes from a country called Thailand. Does anyone know where Thailand is? It's in Southeast Asia, and most of the people who are familiar in our Thailand is because of the food. Have any of you had Thai food? Yeah. You can respond to adults who are sitting there. Yeah. Well, we love Thai food. It's wonderful. It's a great food. But this is a story from Thailand, and it's about this queen. And you know how sometimes something happens and we don't really pay attention to it because we think, it doesn't really matter. Well, this is a story. This queen was always kind of basically neglecting her responsibility. And she was on the balcony talking to one of her advisors, and she had this lovely piece of toast and honey. Who likes toast and honey? Who had toast and honey for the breakfast this morning? Two of us, me and you, Bev. Well, I had to, because you see, don't tell anyone, but I don't like ice cream. So we're having this ice cream social. So I had to fill up in toast and honey because I wasn't going to get any ice cream this afternoon. You love ice cream. Most people do. I'm the only one in my family that doesn't like ice cream. But this queen was eating her toast and honey, and some of the honey dripped off her toast and landed in the railing of the balcony. And her advisor said, we should clean that up. And the queen saw it and said, no, that's not my problem. Let's just leave it. So the advisor did what the queen said. Well, it was really hot. The sun started beating down in the honey, and the honey started running down the railing, and it started dripping down below onto the sidewalk. And the advisor said, excuse me, Your Majesty, I really think we need to clean up that honey because it's on the sidewalk now. And the queen, do you know what she said? That's not my problem. She's not very good, this queen. We need a new queen. And so the advisor said, well, that's what the queen said. But then all of a sudden this lizard came out because all these flies were starting to go around the honey. And this lizard came round and started trying to eat the flies. Have you ever seen pardon? He didn't get stuck. He was avoiding the honey, but that's a really good question. And so they was trying to get all these flies, and the flies are flying around the honey. And then all of a sudden this cat, the baker's cat, came running out because it saw the lizard. So the cat started chasing the lizard, and the advisor said, I really think we need to clean up that honey. Now we've got a cat chasing the lizard. I think this could cause some trouble. Guess what the queen said? It's not my problem. You're getting this. That's the next. Oh, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So what happened? No, but not. Well, we can make that the story. Well, what happened next was the butcher's dog came running out because it saw the cat chasing the lizard, and they thought, well, I want to have some of that fun. So the dog started chasing the cat, and the dog chased it. But then the baker heard that the dog was, trying to snap at the cat. So the baker came out, had a rolling pin, and started hitting the dog. And the advisor said, I think we really need to do something. Look, the baker is. Guess what the queen. That's not my problem. You've got the hang of this, haven't you? And still we've got a long way to go yet, though. So now we've got the dog chasing the cat. Well, the dog's getting hit by the baker with a rolling pin. The dog's chasing the cat's chasing the lizard's trying to eat the flies, and the queen's saying it's not my problem. Well, guess what? The flies are attracted to the honey. Well, you have to wait till the next part of the story. So the butcher who owned the dog thought, hey, you can't hit my cat. So he came out with a broom and started hitting the cat. And then he started hitting the baker. And so they started this fight, and it was just chaos. And the advisor said, we really need to do something about this, Queen. We need to stop it. And the Queen said, it's not my problem. So what are we going to do? The baker owned the dog. The baker owned the cat, and the butcher owned the dog. The Queen's just lazy. She's just very neglectful. So what happened next was the neighbours, the friends of the bakers and the friends of the butchers saw this fight going on. So they started fighting as well. So all these neighbours started fighting. Then the soldiers who belonged to the Queen, they started picking sides because they were friends with some of the neighbours. And the advisor said, we have to do something. Look, your soldiers are fighting now. And it's just chaos. Said, it's not my problem. What happened next? During this fight, someone knocked over a candle and set fire to the carpet. The carpet, the flames just grew, burnt this, and the Queen's palace caught fire. And guess what happened? The Queen had to get evacuated there. So the Queen had to go down this ladder from the balcony with her advisor because the whole palace was on fire. This was a wood palace. So what happened was, this whole thing was in fire, and it was just chaos. And the Queen's looking at it. No, it was made out of glass and wood, and there's probably some stone too. There was probably the foundation was stone. But guess what happened? The Queen's looking at it, and she saw the patch of honey, and she poked her foot in it and said, I really should have done something about that. And so I think that's what happens. Things happen. I mean, you probably see it. Maybe you see it at school. Maybe you have it at, in your neighborhood. Someone does something and you feel maybe someone should do something about that, but we really need to do something. And we, in Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the interdependent web of all existence. And that means that we're responsible for it. So if we see something wrong with the environment, if we see someone treating someone else really badly, we have to say, that is my problem, and we have to do something about it.
So my name is Bruce Knoth. A few weeks ago, I was making phone calls to find out what's important to people who live in the Central Valley. I was on a phone bank. That's when a website auto-dials numbers and connects you when someone answers. We've all been on the receiving end of those calls. Frankly, I used to dread phone banks. I hate to bother people. What if someone's rude? And getting hung up on reminds me of trying to find a date to the prom. The calls matter, though, for personal conversations are important, and the consequences of not reaching out can be severe, so I made myself do it. Now I don't mind making calls, for I've had good conversations. Back to the story. A woman picked up. I asked, how's it going? She said, if I told you, I might cry. Why? What's going on? I had to get my grandson at school. There was a shooter. It was horrible. There were police up and down the street. I've never seen so many AR-15s. It was a ghost town when I got there. And then to see all those kids run to the safety of their caregivers when they were released. It was heartbreaking. I heard her grief as I listened, and sometimes listening is all one can do. I'm horrified by the trauma we inflict on children through the threat of gun violence. I know of lifelong, even intergenerational impact trauma has. It's not just gun violence, but verbal and physical attacks on transgender people. The threat and reality of deportation and its impact on families, bias based on race. It all has deep impact. I'm a lifelong UU. I have decades of experience paying lip service to our principles. Things like inherent worth and dignity, democratic governance, and our interconnected web. Our denomination's magazine, the UU World, gets delivered a few times a year, and I have a long tradition of putting it on our mail pile where it disappears under the next day's mail. I've told this story here, and it's even on UUFRC's website, at glancing at the cover of the UU World in 2018 when it screamed out, "This is no time for a casual faith." That was shortly after white supremacists marched on Charlottesville. Then UUA president Susan Frederick Gray wrote about putting herself on the front line in opposition to Proud Boys and other torch-wielding fanatics. And that cover woke me up. What am I willing to do? What would I risk? Among other things, it turns out I'm willing to call strangers on the phone and ask what they care about. Around the same time, I learned of the work of Marshall Gantz and his concept of public narrative. Marshall Gantz went to Mississippi in 1963 when he was a Harvard undergraduate to help register black voters. That was shortly after 3 student activists were murdered there. Formed by his experiences in Mississippi, he left Harvard and helped Cesar Chavez establish the United Farm Workers. Ultimately, Gantz returned to Harvard, earned a PhD, and studied social movements, activism, and leadership. Gantz speaks of strategy and motivation. Strategy is the how. How are we going to do something? We know where we want to go. How are we going to get there? We UUs excel at strategy. Strategy is intellectual. I like what our denomination stands for. Our values are strong and just, and even more important in the turbulence of the 21st century. We are a rational religion. We excel at reason. We skirt emotion. Gantz tells us that emotion motivates. It's the why. Motivation comes from the heart. Why should I act? Why should I act now? That's where I think we UUs struggle. Personal stories help us map the world emotionally. They help us understand why something matters. That story I told about the grandmother who spoke of her anguish and the relief she witnessed when the children ran to the safety makes me sad and frustrated. Feelings most of us here probably share. I could unite us with that story and our shared values and follow it up with a call to action. So I've learned stories are important, yet it's hard for me to talk about how I feel. Honestly, I walked into Marshall Gantz's workshop several years ago thinking, personal stories, give me a break. I walked out a believer. I'm a stereotypical engineer. I don't talk about feelings. That makes me vulnerable. I suspect I'm in a congregation, perhaps even a denomination, with like-minded people. It's easy to fall back on abstractions, on numbers, and even on other people's stories. Speaking of my own experiences in a way that motivates others takes thought. What details are important? Am I just feeding my ego? Can others relate? Will my words pull us together through common values and vision? When that magazine cover screamed, "This is no time for a casual faith," it stopped me cold. I'm skilled at lip service. Now my faith was in my face. I can almost feel its hot breath and spittle as it shouted, "What's important to you? How much risk will you take? What will you do?" The truth is, I am not willing to confront violent white supremacists as Reverend Susan Frederick Gray did. So what drives me to act? It's not because 3% of the people living in the United States are undocumented, or about 2.6 million Americans identify as transgender, or 12% of the population lives below the poverty line. No, it's because I've heard Miriam, an undocumented high school student, tell her story of being smuggled into this country as a young child and imagining the desperation her parents must have faced. I've heard Macrina's story about ICE deporting the father of her children and glimpsing the trauma inflicted on her family. At my prior congregation in Arlington, Massachusetts, I collaborated with George Kenny, a black recovering addict in Boston. He managed a food pantry for Roxbury's Church of the United Community, and our suburban UU congregation delivered food to them. George spoke of his struggles to stay clean. He died of AIDS in the 90s. Our stories don't all need to be deeply tied to the human condition. During our intergenerational service here a few weeks ago, I was thrilled when a cluster of children tromped down from the balcony and sat up front with our educator, Marcy. And that's when Reverend Brian read aloud to them. Later, one girl, holding Marcy's hand for assurance, took the microphone and told us that books brought her comfort. For me, those moments paid off for 2 years of work and risk-taking we've done as a congregation. I admit that when a conga line of 6-year-olds snaked through coffee hour afterwards, I thought things may be getting out of hand. Those moments demonstrate the comfort the children feel with our church and underlie a story that I can share with parents looking for community. We can all develop our stories, perhaps exploring why we're part of this community. I tell the story of a magazine cover that jolted me, and I got to test drive it when 2 Jehovah's Witnesses showed up at my door, and it worked. Each of us has different stories, ones that may be hard to ferret out, perhaps even painful. Marshall Gantz talks of the difference between the world we have and the world we wish for. When we tell stories that resonate, we can get closer to the world that we desire.
This month, our theme is heritage. And sometimes it's easy to confuse history with heritage, but there is a difference. History is kind of what happened in the past, and there can be interpretations of it. Heritage is that inherited sense of identity that we get from our families, from our culture, from our education, from our jobs, and from our religious community. So today I really want to talk about the heritage that we inherit as a religious community, and specifically around our social justice work. And the Unitarian Universalist minister, Scott Taylor, says this about heritage. He says, protect what we put in place. History urges, protect what we put in place. Heritage urges, know the plot line of which you are part. History is what happened. Heritage is a story still unfolding. History traps us in tales about what they did. Heritage inevitably gets us talking about what we are called to do. Heritage inevitably gets us to talk about what we are called to do. And when I think of heritage, I go back to this image that has been, ever since I read about it about 20 years ago, has been profound for me. And I spoke about it during one of my candidating services here 3.5 years ago. Yes, it's that long. And it's the idea that comes from Elise Boulding. She's a Quaker sociologist, and she talks about the 200-year present, or the long now. And it's a really powerful idea, at least for me, and I think it captures what heritage is. Because what it says is that our influence is 200 years. Now that's kind of hard to believe. So I really gave that some thought when I first read about it, and I came across this idea. I thought about my gran, and I invite you all to think about this. Think of the hand of the oldest person you touched who influenced you. And think about the hand of the youngest person you'll touch who you'll influence. In my case, my maternal grandmother, was born the 1st of January 1900. I so wish she had made it to the year 2000. She'd have been 100, but she died at 93. So I think of her, and then I think of my mum. She was born in 1931. I was born 1962. My daughter was born 2003. If she has a child, there's a good chance she will live till 2100. So I realize I'm just a link in the chain between 1900 and 2100. Now, some of you might be older, most of you are probably younger than me, so you can figure out your own thing. But that idea that the hand that we touch, these people that influence us, and these people we influence, it's not just our children and grandchildren. We're an intergenerational community here. We influence people from 2, 3, 4, 5, and I know we've got people here above a 90, even though they won't admit it. So we've got, that's a huge range. As an intergenerational community, we have that influence across 200 years. So if you think from 200 years from now, that's 2,223. It's mind-boggling, isn't it? So that's what I think of heritage is. And what we do, I mean, I talk about my granny. I'd love to say she was a kind, gentle, loving person. She was a racist. She was sexist against women. But she also grew up, and her husband was a coal mine. She grew up in a coal mining town. And it was a hard life. And I know she loved me. She loved my brother. She loved my dad. I think she loved my mum, but that was her daughter, so the jury's out in that one. But and so I realized that part of being in that chain of being, that connection, is there's things you want to promote, values that we really had from our religious history. And there's also things you want to end. There's generational things you want to stop. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And so I invite you all to think of that. If you start thinking of heritage as that connection in this chain that we are in the middle of, we are not the end of evolution, we're not the end of culture, we are basically a transitionary period. What do we want to put forward to our daughter? What world do I want to create for my daughter and perhaps my granddaughter who will be living in 2100? Because what I do now matters, and that's what our faith tells us. What we do now matters. And what, according to Elise Boulding, it matters 200 years from now, as 100 years in the past matters for us now. And one of my great fears right now is the rise of the extreme right. The attacks on democracy, the attacks on our freedom, the attacks for reproductive justice, the censorship, which we'll be talking more about next Sunday because it's banned book week this week. And Unitarian Universalists are people of the book, we all have a different book. But the banned book week is serious, the curtailing of the press freedoms, the denying of people the rights to vote. There's so much denial of freedom going on, there's so much attacks on our democracy that I think is really serious, that we all need to take a stand on. We need to take a stand on as individuals, we need to take a stand on our workplaces, we need to take a stand with our neighbours. And I also particularly think being in California, we're somewhat sheltered with that, but as most of you know, I served for 12 years in Texas. And I talked to my Texas colleagues about what trans youth are going through there, what the attack on democracy, the attack on voting rights. We're a Unitarian Universalist movement. Can we connect with this group? I mean, we had a guest here, I think you said, Dan, you're from Indiana, was it? I can imagine you've got some challenges politically. How can we partner as a group that live in a very privileged, a very liberal thing? Not that there's not problems here. We all see it every time we walk down the street with the homeless and the mental health crisis. But can we partner to help the communities we have in these other areas like Indiana, like Texas, like Florida? Because that's what a religious movement is. It's not just across time, it's across space. We can support our religious communities that are really under attack right now. There was the church in Dallas, Fort Worth, actually it was, they got firebombed recently. These things are really serious right now. And we need to support those communities that are really at the forefront of it. And we can do that as a religious movement. Martin Luther King said that the church shouldn't just be a thermostat. It shouldn't just be a thermometer, it should be a thermostat in our culture. Thermometer just measures the temperature. Thermostat controls it. And he says this, he said, in the old days, he's talking about early Christianity, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideals and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. So those issues we care about, we need to turn up the temperature on those issues, be it in this area, homelessness, affordability, mental health. But then we need to support those other areas and help them turn up the thermometer for voting rights, for transgender rights. Because we are a religious movement, we can influence well beyond the walls of this church, well beyond San Mateo County, well beyond United States. I want to tell you a story, and this is going to get highly political, and I could get into trouble for this, but I still don't like ice cream. The night of the 2016 election, my daughter was 13. She was quite excited. She was a Bernie Sanders supporter, but, she was okay with Hillary Clinton, first woman president. Of course, we all know what happened. She sat at the end of my bed. We let her stay up for the election after it was clear I was losing, and said, "The next president of the United States looks at me as a piece of meat. The next president of the United States looks at me as a piece of meat." That's coming from a 13-year-old girl, and that broke my heart to hear that coming from her. And also what breaks my heart even more, she's right. The toxic masculinity, the empowering of these negative voices, this sexism, this homophobia, this transphobia, this attack on democratic rights, attack on our freedoms. It's horrendous. And Bruce is right. What are we going to do about it? And this is no time for a casual faith. We need to be a thermostat and turn up the temperature to bring about change in this country. Because I want to see my daughter and a granddaughter in the year 2100 living in a better world now, and I'm not convinced it's going in the right direction, and I feel called to do that. That's a personal story. What I heard from my daughter, I committed. As a religious leader, I want to bring people together, but sometimes you need to take a stand and say, no, that's wrong. I do not agree with that. I am going to fight you on that. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a Quaker like Elise Goulding. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. If I think something's wrong, I'm going to take a stand. I think sometimes we play too nice. And I'm also called as a religious leader that how we do this work is important, not just what we do. And can we do it in a way that does center love to it, even love to those that I'm feeling really quite angry with. I'm a less than gentle angry person right now. I'm quite angry with where the country's going, where our world's going. And I think we need to take a strong stand on it. But ultimately, religious work calls me to my better self. Because we are motivated by the love of all, and that is not easy. It's a very trite thing to say, but can I love those that I'm really in opposition with? And my answer is yes. But boy, is it difficult. But ultimately, the love of all means that I'm not motivated by power for me. I'm not motivated by self-interest, but what I want to do is bring my values and commit to making them a bigger part of this community, of San Mateo County, of the United States, and the world. Because I honestly believe that if our values were more prevalent in the world would be a better place. And I believe in the year 2100, my daughter and her family and all who are alive that time could be in a better place. And in a world where we have so many choices vying for our time, energy, and talent, in a world with so many injustices pulling on our compassion, our heartbreaking care, our faith asks us, what are we willing to commit emotionally to and act upon? And Bruce asked, why should I act now? And as many of you know, my two questions that I ask frequently are, what do you love and inspires you to action, and what breaks your heart and calls you to action? What do you love and what breaks your heart? We heard the stories that broke Bruce's heart. You heard the stories, some of them that break my heart. Because we need to follow our passion. Because to repair our world, to heal our world, we need more than people act. We need more people acting passionately, justly, and manifest love in action, which is justice. As Cornel West said, it's justice is what love looks like in public. How do we want to give life the shape of justice? I turn to the words of Jimmy Carter, whose 99th birthday today. I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can. for as long as I can with whatever I have to try to make a difference. So let's live our religious principles authentically and as lovingly as we can, and passionately. Let's bring alive, because being alive is a gift of nature, but living a meaningful life is a gift to ourselves and a gift to the world around us. What are you willing to commit yourself to as we move forward?